Hello, fourth grade. Welcome to math class today. You will need your book, a piece of paper, and a pencil. And we're going to open up our books to lesson 107. And you want to open up to page 676. And our goal today is what we want to be able to do is I can add and subtract fractions with common denominators. So we are going to be working with adding and subtracting fractions, but we need to review just some different terms, okay? So we have, it says on here, common denominators. Well, let's just review, first of all, the names of these numbers on a fraction. So we know here we have the numerator, and here is the denominator. Denominator is the number on the bottom. So when we add fractions like this that have common denominators, meaning common, if you have something in common with somebody, that means that you like something that's the same. So let's say you have a friend that likes baseball, and maybe your friend plays baseball. So you have that in common. That is the same, okay? So when we talk about common denominators, we're saying that the number on the bottom is the same. So when we add, it looks like we're adding here, this is a plus sign, these two fractions, 1/3 plus 1/3, you add the numerator, but then you leave the denominator alone, okay? So just keep that in mind. You don't add the bottom and the top, you just add the top. So 1/3 plus 1/3 would equal 2/3. So it's the same thing if, let's say, you were going to subtract, okay? So again, we're looking for those fractions with common denominators. Remember, the numbers that are same on the bottom. So I'm looking at example 2 on page 676 in your book. And it talks about to make a small bow for a present, Denitra cut 1/5 of a yard of ribbon from a length of ribbon that was 3/5 of a yard long. What is the length of the ribbon that was not used? In other words, what was left? So she started with 3/5. She cut off, so obviously you're losing it. So we're going to put minus 1/5. And they're asking what was left. How many yards was left? So just like when you add fractions with common denominators, you add the top, you leave the bottom. Same thing here. You subtract the top. 3 minus 1 is 2. You leave the bottom, 2/5. Okay? So we can also do the same thing with mixed numbers. So I'm looking at example 3 on the top of 677, and it says add 2 3/5 plus 3 1/5. So when we do that, we wonder to ourselves, well, what am I supposed to add first? What do I do? It is helpful to remember that you can add these numbers first. Another way of looking at it is if you would do it vertically. I'll just show this to you. So if you would do 2 3/5 plus 3 1/5. So if that's easier for you. So in other words, then you would do your fraction. So 3/5 plus 1/5. Remember, you leave the 5th. You just add. And then 2 plus 3 is 5. So that would be 5 4/5. So basically what you're doing is you're just adding these, the bigger numbers, and then you add your fractions and you leave the denominators alone and add the numerators. Okay? Same thing goes for example 4. It says subtract 5 2/3 minus 1 1/3. Now I would suggest write it like this. 5 2/3 minus 1 1/3. So 2 minus 1 is 1. We leave the 3 alone. 5 minus 1 is 4. So your answer is 4 1/3. All right, so let's look at example 5. This is a good one. I love this one. It talks about In the race, Martin rode his bike 7.5 miles and ran 2.5 miles. All together, how far did Martin ride his bike and run? So he rode his bike 7.5 miles, and then he ran 2.5. Well, now we're adding, so 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 is over 2. So the denominator stays the same, and 7 plus 2 is 9. Now we say 9 and 2/2. That's a little awkward because remember, a fraction that has the same numerator and denominator is equal to what number? 1, right? So we basically are saying 9 and 1. Well, what's 9 plus 1? 10. So your answer would be 10. So let's take a look now at the lesson practice problems on page 677. So if you could do that, now that we know what we're doing, remember if there are common denominators, we're not going to add the denominator, we are going to add the numerators. So let's take a look at letter A. It says find each sum or difference. Now, you might wonder, do I have to write this out? I think once we get to the mixed number problems, when we get to letter G, then we'll focus on that. But for now, let's take a look at letter A. We have 1/3 plus 1/3. Well, what's 1 plus 1 is 2. We leave the denominator alone, 3, 2/3. All right, then we take a look at letter B. 1/4 plus 2/4. What's 1 plus 2 is 3. We leave the denominator, 4. Letter C. Why don't you give that one a try? All right, so 3 plus 4 is 7. Denominator same, 10. Pretty easy, isn't it? So let's look at letter D. Now, make sure we take a look at the symbol. And it says minus, so 2/3 minus 1/3. So 2 minus 1 is 1. 1/3. E. 3 minus 2 is 1 over the common denominator, which is 4, 1/4. And letter F, 9 minus 6 is 3. The denominator stays the same, is 10. Hope you're understanding. It's not too hard. Once you get it, piece of cake. All right, so now we're going to get to the mixed numbers. So we have G. Now, I'm going to write this one out. I'm not requiring you to do this for all of them. I think a lot of this stuff you can do in your head. But if we do 2 and 1/4 plus 4 and 2/4. Now I want to make sure I wrote everything down correctly, which I did. So 1 plus 2 is 3. I leave the denominator alone, and then I add, which is 6 and 3/4. So letter H. Another thing you can look across, H, 5 and 3/8 plus 1 and 2/8. I could say, well, what's 5 plus 1? 5 plus 1 is 6. Then I look at the fractions. What's 3 plus 2 is 5. And then that would stay the same. So it would be 6 and 5/8. That's another way of doing it. You can either do it like this if you feel like you have to write it out, or like that if you feel like you can do it in your head. So letter I. Now we have 8 plus 1 and 2/5. So what's 8 plus 1? Is 9. And there's nothing to add to the fraction. It's like kind of like 2/5 plus 0, which is 2/5. Now we go to J. I will write out this one. So 4 and 3/5 minus 1 and 1/5. 3/5 minus 1/5 is 2/5. 4 minus 1 is 3. So our answer is 3 and 2/5. Letter K. 9 minus 4 is 5. 3/4 minus 2/4. Well, 3 minus 2 is 1, and 4 stays the same. 1/4. L. 12 minus 3 is 9. 8 minus 3 is 5. And it's over 9. 9 and 5/9. How are we doing so far? Good? All right. So letter M, we have 2 more to go. So letter M. How much is 3/8 plus 4/8? So because I can't see, that's all written in words, that's going to be one I'm going to write out. 3/8 plus 4/8 equals, add the top, 7, common denominator 8. My answer is 7/8. Finally, the last one. The troop headed to the end of the trail and back. If the trail was 3.5 miles long, how far did the troop hike? So they went 3.5 miles that way, 3.5 miles this way. So it looks like what we're doing here is we are going 3 1/2 plus 3 1/2. 1 plus 1 is 2, and then 6. And remember, when we had that example problem, 2 halves is equal to 1. So we're not going to say 6, 1. We're going to say 6 plus 1 is 7. So our answer would be 7 miles. All right, 4th grade, I hope that you understand this concept. Remember, you add the numerators on the top, you leave the common denominators alone. Make sure that you watch to make sure what kind of problem it is, whether it's adding or subtracting. Your assignment for next time is to complete pages 678 to 679, numbers 1 through 30.